The air in my small apartment was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the faint, persistent odor of dust. It clung to everything, a silent testament to my neglect. Outside, the city hummed a ceaseless, indifferent song. Inside, it was just me and the quiet. A silence that had settled in after Alina left, a silence that felt heavier than any sound. I traced the condensation ring on my desk, a faint ghost of a forgotten mug. Another night, another dead end. The equations blurred on the screen, marking me with their elegant, unsolvable mysteries. I was Thomas, astrophysicist, a man who once stared at the stars with a sense of wonder, now just staring at numbers. My work had become a refuge, a place to lose myself. But lately, even that solace felt thin. The data streams, usually a predictable flow of stellar radiation and gravitational anomalies, had begun to whisper. Not in a way anyone else would hear, of course. They were anomalies, yes, but unlike any I'd ever catalogued. Too regular, too deliberate. I'd spent weeks sifting through them, my initial skepticism slowly eroding, replaced by a gnawing unease. It felt like staring at a distorted reflection, a hint of something vast and alien peering back. Alina's photograph sat on my desk, her smile a bright, painful shard. He had loved the woods, the quiet green spaces that offered a reprieve from the city's glare. She'd always tried to pull me out of my head, out of the nebulae and black holes I so readily inhabited. "Thomas," he'd say, his voice a melody I still heard in the quietest hours. "There's a world out here too." I'd usually nod, my mind already back on some celestial puzzle. Now, the memory felt like a rebuke. The data pulled me further. Not just statistical blips anymore, but patterns. Complex, intricate patterns that defied any known physical law. They appeared in the cosmic microwave background, in the distribution of galaxies, even in the faint radio signals from distant pulsars. It was as if something was painting across the canvas of the universe, with a brushstroke too grand, too ancient for me to comprehend. I started isolating the sources, tracing them back, but the patterns persisted. My colleagues, the few I still spoke to, dismissed my findings as overwork, as grief manifesting in abstract forms. Thomas, one of them, a younger researcher with an overly bright smile, had said, "I need a break, get some fresh air, go for a walk." He gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the distant, hazy outline of the hills. He didn't understand. This wasn't about a break. This was about something fundamental. The patterns began to coalesce, to form a narrative written in the language of physics, but with a grammar I was only beginning to decipher. It spoke of immense scales of time, of forces that shaped galaxies like clay. It hinted at a consciousness, not biological, not anything I could define, but a vast, pervasive intelligence that existed within reality itself. They began to focus. The anomalies weren't just everywhere anymore. They were converging towards a specific point, towards Earth. I zoomed in on the latest data set, subtle distortion in the gravitational field of our solar system, tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. And it was growing. I needed to see it for myself, not on a screen, not as numbers. Alina had always spoken of a place deep in the countryside, where the trees grew so old they seemed to hold the weight of centuries, an old growth forest where locals refused to go. She'd never explained why. I dismissed it then, another of her whimsical notions. Now it felt like a destination. I packed a small bag, the worn leather smelling faintly of her perfume. The drive was long, the city lights receding into a smear of orange. The roads grew narrower, the asphalt giving way to gravel, then to rutted tracks. The trees began to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, something ancient and unsettling. I parked the car where the track finally dissolved into an impenetrable wall of foliage. It was alive, a rustling in the undergrowth, a snap of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl. But beneath it all there was a profound stillness, a watchful quality that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stepped out of the car, my boots sinking into the mossy ground. This was it, the old growth forest where locals refused to go. What were they watching? The hum of the city had become a dull ache behind my eyes. I tried to sleep, but the silence in my apartment was a hollow echo of the silence that had fallen over my life since Alina. The coffee pot gurgled its last, pathetic sigh. I poured the bitter dregs into a chipped mug, the warmth a fleeting comfort against the persistent chill that seemed to have taken root in my bones. It had been weeks since I'd truly felt warm. Weeks since I'd felt anything beyond this gnawing emptiness. I found myself drawn back to the data, always back to the data. The anomaly, a flicker in the cosmic background radiation, had been dismissed by my colleagues as a calibration error, a ghost in the machine. But it felt different. It felt deliberate. I'd spent days tracing its spectral signature, cross-referencing with every known celestial phenomenon. Nothing. It was a phantom limb of the universe, a presence I could sense but not identify. That night, the city's usual symphony of sirens and distant traffic seemed muted, as if holding its breath. A strange stillness had fallen. A faint shimmer, almost imperceptible, appeared on the screen, not the usual static, not a glitch. This was the anomaly. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic beat like a cosmic heartbeat. It was back, and it was stronger this time. My breath hitched. My hands, usually steady, trembled as I reached for the mouse. I zoomed in, my pupils dilating, trying to absorb every detail. The pattern was clearer now, more defined. It wasn't a random scattering of energy. It was structured, almost intelligent. This wasn't a ghost. This was a signal. I worked through the night, fueled by a desperate energy that bypassed my exhaustion. I felt a growing sense of urgency, a need to understand, to quantify this impossible thing. The city outside remained unnervingly quiet. The usual glow of streetlights seemed to have dimmed, as if the very fabric of the night was fraying. I found myself glancing at the window, half expecting to see something out of the ordinary, something that mirrored the strangeness unfolding on my screen. By dawn, the anomaly had faded, leaving behind only the ghost of its presence in the data logs. But it had left something else too, a seed of doubt, or perhaps of terrifying certainty. I had seen it. I had felt it. It was real, and it was not of this world. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on me. My colleagues would laugh. They would tell me I needed rest, that grief was playing tricks on my mind. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had felt. This was not a delusion. This was a discovery, a dangerous one. I needed to get away from the city, from the sterile confines of my apartment and the suffocating normalcy of my colleagues. I needed space, air, something real. My mind, usually so sharp, felt clouded, sluggish. The anomaly had burrowed its way into my thoughts, a persistent, unsettling hum beneath the surface of my consciousness. The old growth forest where locals refused to go. It was said to be ancient, untouched, a place where things lingered, a place where the veil between worlds felt thin. It was a foolish impulse, born of desperation, but it was the only impulse I had left. I packed a small bag, the familiar weight of my laptop a reassuring presence. The air outside my apartment was still heavy. As I drove away, the sky began to lighten, sickly gray bleeding into the horizon. The entrance to the old growth forest where locals refused to go was marked by a rusted, fallen sign, half swallowed by moss. The air here was different. The trees were colossal, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy that blotted out the sky. Sunlight filtered through in thin, ethereal shafts, illuminating patches of the forest floor. I walked for hours, the trees pressing in, their gnarled trunks like ancient, watchful sentinels. A sense of being observed began to creep over me. It wasn't the furtive glance of an animal, but something deeper, more pervasive. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, like tiny, invisible fingers tracing my movements. Then I heard it, a sound unlike any I had ever encountered. It was a low, resonant thrum, originating from somewhere deep within the forest. It wasn't a natural sound. It had a rhythm, a cadence that felt familiar. My heart, which I thought had grown numb, began to beat with a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I froze, straining to hear over the pounding in my ears. The thrumming grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to vibrate not just in the air, but in the very ground beneath my feet. It was the same pattern as the anomaly, amplified, made manifest. I looked around wildly, my eyes darting between the impossibly tall trees. Was this a hallucination, a product of my fractured mind? The thrumming intensified, and with it, a subtle distortion began to appear in the air around me. Shapes flickered at the edge of my vision, fleeting and indistinct. The trees seemed to warp and bend, their forms momentarily losing their solidity. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. This was not just data on a screen anymore. This was real. This was happening here. The vast, ancient intelligence I had glimpsed in the cosmos. Was it here in this forgotten patch of woods? And if so, what did it want? The chipped mug warmed my hands, a small comfort against the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It wasn't the weather. The sky outside my window, a bruised purple at dawn, promised a mild spring day. It was the data. The numbers that swam behind my eyelids, refusing to resolve into anything comprehensible. For 3 days, I'd been lost in it, a labyrinth of cosmic whispers that spoke of something vast, something wrong. My wife, Alina, would have told me to step away, to breathe, to remember the taste of sunlight on my skin. But Alina was gone, and the universe had decided to offer me this instead of solace. A gnawing, insistent puzzle that hinted at an intelligence so ancient, so utterly alien, that my mind recoiled from its implications. I traced the rim of the mug, the anomaly. It wasn't a single event, but a pattern, a subtle warp in the fabric of spacetime that rippled across light years. It was too regular, too deliberate to be a natural phenomenon. It was a signature, a mark, but of what? And why had it appeared now, in the data I'd been meticulously sifting through, a task I'd taken on out of sheer, desperate habit? The usual city sounds the distant wail of a siren. The rumble of traffic seemed muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My apartment felt too small, the walls closing in. I needed air, real air, not the recycled, stale breath of my self-imposed isolation. I grabbed my jacket, a worn canvas thing that still held the faint scent of pine needles from my last, futile attempt to escape. They said it was cursed, that things happened there that couldn't be explained. I dismissed it as superstition, rural folklore. The drive took me out of the city's grimy embrace, the asphalt giving way to a rutted dirt track. The trees loomed, ancient sentinels draped in moss, their branches gnarled and reaching like skeletal fingers. The air grew cooler, thicker, carrying the damp, earthy smell of decay and new life intertwined. Sunlight, when it managed to pierce the dense canopy, dappled the forest floor in shifting patterns, creating an illusion of movement in the periphery. I parked the car and stepped out. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures. I walked deeper, the fallen leaves crunching under my boots. My mind, however, was miles away, back in the sterile glow of my computer screen. I'd isolated its origin point, a region of the sky that should have been unremarkable, empty. But the data insisted otherwise. There was a presence there, a deliberate arrangement of energy signatures that defied all known physics. It wasn't just a ripple, it was a carefully constructed signal. And then I saw it, or rather, felt it, a change in the air, a subtle vibration that resonated not in my ears, but in my bones. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a change in atmospheric pressure. This was something else. My gaze snapped upwards through the tangled branches. The sky was no longer bruised purple. It was a swirling vortex of impassable colors, hues that had no name, no earthly comparison. They bled into one another, forming patterns that were both chaotic and terrifyingly ordered. It was as if the sky itself was a canvas, and something vast and unseen was painting upon it with a brush dipped in madness. A low hum began, a sound that started as a faint tremor beneath my feet and grew, resonating in my chest. It was not a mechanical sound, but something organic, something alive. It vibrated through the very earth, through the ancient trees, through me. My skin prickled. My hands clenched into fists, my grip tight. This was not a discovery. This was an intrusion. I stumbled back, my foot catching on a root. I fell, scraping my hands on the damp earth. The hum intensified, a resonant thrum that felt like it was trying to pry open my skull. The impassable colors in the sky pulsed, growing brighter, more insistent. This was not a scientific curiosity. This was a warning. The patterns in the data weren't just a signature, they were a message. And the message was not for humanity. It was about humanity. My eyes darted around the unnervingly still forest. The trees seemed to lean in, their silent watch turning into something more sinister. The hum vibrated in my teeth. The colors in the sky were no longer distant. They were descending. What had I awakened? The hum of the servers was a low thrum in the background, a familiar lullaby that usually soothed my frayed nerves. Tonight, it felt like a nervous tremor. I leaned back, the worn leather of my office chair creaking a protest. The screen in front of me glowed with 1,000 points of light, each a distant galaxy, each a whisper of the cosmos. But it wasn't the familiar constellations that held my attention. It was the anomalies, the patterns that defied physics as I understood it. I'd spent weeks tracing them, following the faintest threads of deviation in the cosmic microwave background radiation, in the spectral signatures of nebulae millions of light-years away. It was like finding a single, misplaced brushstroke in a masterpiece, a deliberate imperfection that screamed intent. My wife, Alina, would have loved this. She always saw the beauty in the flaws, the stories hidden in the imperfections. I missed her quiet strength, the way her presence could anchor me when the vastness of space threatened to pull me under. The data streams I'd been feeding into the simulation were not from Earth. They were fragments, salvaged from derelict probes sent out decades ago, their original missions long forgotten, their data corrupted and dismissed as noise. But I'd found a way to filter that noise, to pull out the ghostly echoes of signals that shouldn't have been there. Signals that predated our own civilization by eons. The simulation began to resolve, not into galaxies but into something else. Shapes, structures. They bloomed on the screen, impossibly vast, impossibly complex. They were not natural formations. They were deliberate, like monumental sculptures carved from space-time itself, arranged in patterns that resonated with the subtle distortions I'd been tracking. My breath hitched. These weren't new. The probes had encountered them before, their instruments unable to comprehend, their cameras capturing only fleeting blurs of impossible geometry before succumbing to the void. Each derelict probe, each lost transmission, became a breadcrumb, and the trail led back and back and back. I saw it then, a faint but undeniable signature, a specific, intricate waveform. It appeared in the data from a probe lost near the Oort cloud, then again in signals from a probe that had drifted into interstellar space. And then, impossibly, I found it woven into the ancient radio signals captured by a long-defunct Soviet telescope, signals that had baffled astronomers for years. It was a watermark, a signature left by something that had been here, or at least had made its presence known, long before humanity had even learned to harness fire. This wasn't a new phenomenon. It was ancient, pervasive, and it was connected. The same impossible structures, the same subtle cosmic signatures, appearing across vast stretches of time and space. It suggested not just intelligence, but a deliberate, ongoing interaction with the fabric of the universe. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the archived sensor logs, a probe that had ventured near a binary star system, its mission to study stellar evolution. It had returned with readings that defied gravity, with images of light that bent in ways that shouldn't have been possible. But in the background noise of its final transmission, I could hear it. Faint, almost subliminal, but undeniably present. The waveform. I had been so consumed with the what that I'd barely considered the why. Why would such an entity leave these traces? Was it a warning, a message, or something far more unsettling? It had malfunctioned, transmitting corrupted data for weeks before going silent. But within the corruption, I saw it again. The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture I desperately didn't want to see. This entity, whatever it was, wasn't just leaving its mark. It was interacting, manipulating, and its interactions weren't confined to the distant past or the far reaches of space. The patterns were becoming more frequent, more localized. My gaze drifted to the window. The bruised purple sky had deepened to an inky black, studded with the indifferent pinpricks of stars. I could almost feel their ancient gaze, a silent, knowing observation. The data wasn't just telling me about the past. I pulled up a map of recent cosmic observations, cross-referencing them with the temporal signature of the waveform. The coincidences were too numerous to ignore. The anomaly around the Kepler 186f system. The strange radio bursts from the Andromeda galaxy. Even a peculiar fluctuation in the Earth's magnetosphere just last year, dismissed by the geophysical community as an unprecedented solar flare, all bore the faint, unmistakable imprint. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It wasn't the frantic, adrenaline-fueled beat of fear, but a heavy, leaden thud, each pulse a confirmation of the inevitable. This ancient intelligence was not a passive observer of the universe. It was a sculptor, a weaver, a force that had shaped worlds and perhaps entire civilizations. And the threads it was now pulling were leading closer to home. I remembered the local legends about the old growth forest where locals refused to go. I'd always dismissed them as folklore, the ramblings of isolated communities. Could the patterns I was seeing, the ancient signatures, be manifesting in subtler, more terrestrial ways? There was this entity's attention not just on the distant cosmos, but on the very ground beneath our feet. The waveform pulsed on my screen, a silent, cosmic siren call. It was everywhere, and it was undeniably, terrifyingly aware. There was either first to truly see it, or was I merely the next in a long line of those who had glimpsed the truth only to be absorbed? The screen in front of me glowed with 1,000 points of light, each a star, a galaxy, a universe unto itself, and in their midst a smudge, a void, not empty, not really. It was a place where the usual cosmic chatter, the faint whispers of background radiation simply stopped. For weeks I'd chased this anomaly, this silent scream in the symphony of the cosmos. Sensor malfunction, data corruption. The universe, they'd patiently explained, is not a stage for grand pronouncements. It was just physics, but this felt different, this felt deliberate. My wife, Alara, had loved the stars. She'd seen wonder where I saw only equations. Instead, I found this. I traced the outline of the anomaly with my finger, the cool glass of the monitor a poor substitute for Alara's warmth. It wasn't a static patch. It shifted subtly over time. Not a drift, not a celestial ballet. It was a contraction, a drawing in, as if something were slowly, inexorably, pulling the very fabric of space around itself. And the data streams feeding into it, the faint signals I'd managed to isolate, were not random. They were structured, organized, like threads being woven. A shiver, unrelated to the room's temperature, traced a path down my spine. I'd been cross-referencing the anomaly's position with known astronomical events, searching for any correlation. Nothing. It existed in a seemingly unremarkable sector of the sky, far from any nebulae or galactic clusters. But then, I'd started looking beyond the immediate. I'd begun to examine historical cosmic events, catalogued over centuries. A faint, almost imperceptible echo in the ancient astronomical records, a subtle disruption in the expected cosmic background radiation, dating back millennia. It was too faint to be conclusive, too vague to be significant. Until now, I brought up a separate timeline, overlaying the anomaly's observed contraction with a predicted celestial alignment, not a common one. This was a rare convergence, a cosmic knot that tied together several distant, massive stellar objects. It happened only once every few thousand years, and the calculations, based on the current trajectory of the anomaly's contraction, suggested it was happening now. Or rather, it was culminating now. My breath hitched. It was showing a preparation. The anomaly was expanding, or rather, the space within it was being consumed in a precise, calculated manner leading up to this specific alignment. It was like a giant maw opening, its edges sharpening in anticipation of a feast. A low groan escaped my lips. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. The precision was too acute, the timing too perfect. This was an intelligence, an unfathomable, ancient intelligence manipulating space-time itself, and it was doing so for a reason, a purpose. I zoomed out, letting the vastness of the starfield fill the screen. The anomaly, once a mere smudge, now felt like a gaping wound. The structured signals were clearer, more insistent. They weren't just threads, they were conduits, channels being opened for what? My gaze drifted to Alara's photograph, perched on the corner of my desk. She'd always believed in the beauty of the universe, in its inherent order. What would she think of this? Of a universe that wasn't just indifferent, but actively hungry. I ran another simulation, pushing the parameters to their absolute limit. The contraction wasn't just about drawing things in, it was about shaping them. The converging stellar energies, the very fabric of spacetime being warped, were being molded into something new, something directed. If this entity was preparing for something, using this alignment as a focal point, what was it intending to do? And why was Earth, this tiny, insignificant speck of dust, so close to the epicenter of this cosmic manipulation? I remembered a conversation with a local ranger, a gruff man with eyes that held a perpetual unease. He'd warned me away from the old growth forest where locals refused to go. He'd spoken of ancient things that slept, and that were best left undisturbed. At the time, I dismissed it as folklore, the ramblings of a superstitious man. There was this entity reaching out, or was it already here, woven into the very fabric of our world in ways I couldn't yet comprehend? The anomaly pulsed on my screen, a silent, growing threat. The alignment was imminent, and the data was screaming a single, terrifying word: invasion. What was this entity trying to achieve? And was there anything I could do to stop it? The screen in front of me glowed with 1,000 points of light, each a whisper of the impossible. This wasn't just data, it was a symphony of wrongness, a cosmic discord that screamed of an intelligence vast and utterly alien. My wife, lost to the quiet void of grief, would have understood. She always saw the patterns, the hidden music in the universe. Now I was the only one listening. The anomaly wasn't a single blip. It was a network, a vast, interconnected web of signals that defied every known law of physics. It pulsed, shifted, and expanded. My fingers, usually nimble on the keyboard, trembled as I traced its digital veins. It was as if the very fabric of spacetime was breathing and I had found its lungs. This was not a natural phenomenon. It was a presence. I had to tell someone. The thought clawed at me, a desperate urge to break the suffocating isolation. My colleagues, buried in their own predictable orbits of research, would dismiss me. They'd talk of equipment malfunction, of statistical outliers, but this was beyond that. This was a fundamental alteration of reality, a looming shadow cast from the unfathomable deep. I decided on the one person I thought might listen without immediate dismissal. A former mentor, a man who had always championed my more unconventional ideas. He lived on the edge of town, his small cottage a haven of old books and crackling fires, far from the sterile gleam of the university. The drive was long, the night air growing heavy and damp as I left the city lights behind. The trees were ancient, their gnarled branches like skeletal fingers against the sliver of moon. An unnatural stillness settled, the usual symphony of the night crickets, owls, the rustle of unseen creatures was absent. It felt as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, a promise of comfort. The path to his door was overgrown, the dense foliage brushing against my legs with a damp, insistent touch. He opened the door before I could knock. His eyes, usually twinkling with amusement, held a flicker of concern. "Thomas, you look as though you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I managed, stepping into the welcome warmth of his study. The scent of pipe tobacco and old paper was a balm. "I've seen something that makes ghosts seem like comforting bedtime stories." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the data, the charts, the impossible readings. I spoke of the cosmic network, the emergent intelligence, the terrifying implication that it was aware. I saw his brow furrow in concentration, then furrow deeper in what I feared was skepticism. "Thomas," he said, his voice gentle, "I know you've been under immense strain since he passed. Grief can play tricks on the mind. These readings, they could be a sophisticated glitch, a misinterpretation of complex stellar phenomena." "It's not a glitch," I insisted, my voice rising, the desperation I'd tried to suppress bubbling to the surface. "I've cross-referenced everything, run every diagnostic. This is real, it's a consciousness, and it's looking at us." He poured me a brandy, the amber liquid swirling in the glass. He didn't meet my eyes. "I understand your passion, your dedication. But to suggest an extraterrestrial intelligence, one capable of manipulating reality itself, it's a leap, Thomas. A monumental leap without empirical proof that stands up to scrutiny." "The data is the proof." I slammed my hand on his desk, the scattered papers jumping. He flinched. "You're not seeing it because you don't want to see it. Because it's too. I cannot endorse these findings. I cannot lend my name to what sounds like a fever dream. The warmth of his study suddenly felt stifling, the crackling fire marking my distress. I had come seeking an ally, a voice of reason, and I had found only polite dismissal. The isolation I had tried to escape now felt like a physical weight, crushing me. Take some time, rest, let the data settle. I stepped out into the night, the cold air a shock against my skin. As I walked back to my car, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible vibration in the air, a low thrum that wasn't the hum of distant machinery. It was deeper, more resonant. It felt alive, and it seemed to emanate from the ancient, silent woods. The air in the old-growth forest where locals refused to go was thick, clinging to my lungs like damp wool. It wasn't just cold. It was a profound, bone-deep chill that seemed to originate not from the atmosphere, but from within the very earth beneath my feet. The low thrum, the one that had snagged my attention moments ago, had intensified. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It was a sound, or rather, a feeling of sound, a pressure that pushed against my eardrums from the inside. My car, parked at the edge of the tree line, felt 1,000,000 miles away. I'd come here seeking silence, a respite from the ceaseless chatter of my own mind, a mind that had become a prisoner of the data. The anomalous readings, the impassable patterns. They weren't just numbers on a screen anymore. The trees here were ancient sentinels, their branches gnarled and twisted, draped with moss that hung like spectral beards. They absorbed all light, creating pockets of absolute blackness that seemed to breathe. The metal was slick, coated in a fine, gritty dust that hadn't been there before. I wiped my hand on my trousers, the rough fabric doing little to dislodge the clinging particles. They felt organic, like powdered bone. The thrumming grew. It was a bass note played on an instrument of impassable scale, a sound that bypassed my ears and vibrated through my very being. Nothing moved. No animal rustle, no snapped twig. Then the stars. I tilted my head back, my breath catching in my throat. They were wrong, utterly, terrifyingly wrong. The familiar constellations were there, but distorted, warped as if viewed through rippling water. And between them, where blackness should have reigned, were faint, phosphorescent streaks, like cosmic brushstrokes of an alien artist. They pulsed with a faint, sickly luminescence, matching the rhythm of the thrumming. This was it, the convergence. The data hadn't lied. It had been a warning, a roadmap to this precise moment. The entity, the vast, indifferent intelligence I'd glimpsed in the data, was making its presence known. Not through some grand pronouncement, but through a subtle, invasive alteration of reality itself. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered, a pathetic, reedy sound against the overwhelming cosmic drone. It caught, finally, a wave of false security washing over me. I would drive. I would get back to the observatory, to the equipment, to the only place I might find an answer, a way to. To what? To stop it. The absurdity of the thought was a bitter pill. The air grew heavy, thick with an ozone scent, like the aftermath of a lightning strike, but cleaner, sharper. The phosphorescent streaks in the sky intensified, bleeding into one another, forming vast, swirling nebulae of impassable colors, shades of violet and chartreuse that had no name. My car's headlights cut through the gloom, but they seemed to bend, to warp as they hit the trees. The solid trunks appeared to shimmer, to ripple. It was as if the forest itself was becoming fluid, its edges blurring. My vision swam. The thrumming in my head reached a crescendo, a physical pain that made me cry out. I slammed on the brakes. The car lurched, tires spitting gravel. I had to get out. I had to see. But the data, it was a siren song, and I was too far gone to resist. I opened the door, the sound a faint pop against the overwhelming sonic pressure. The forest floor under my feet was no longer soft earth and decaying leaves. It was hard, unyielding like glass. I looked down. The ground was a mosaic of obsidian shards, reflecting the distorted starlight in 1,000 fragmented patterns. The trees were no longer trees, they were something else. Their forms were still vaguely arboreal, but their bark was a shifting, iridescent membrane, pulsing with the same sickly light as the sky. They writhed, slowly, deliberately, their branches reaching, not towards the sky, but towards me. The thrumming was now a deafening roar, a sound that tore at the edges of my sanity. It wasn't just a sound. It was a thought, a vast, alien consciousness pressing in, overwhelming, demanding. And then I saw it. Not a thing, not a being, but a disruption. A tear in the sky, full of something that defied description, that frayed the edges of my perception. It was a gaping maw, a cosmic wound, and from it the impassable colors poured, the phosphorescent light intensified, and the thrumming became a chorus of alien voices, speaking in a language that was not meant for human ears. My legs gave out. I sank to my knees on the glassy ground, pain in my head a searing inferno. I looked up at the tear, at the alien light pouring through. It was beautiful in a terrifying, annihilating way. It was the end of everything I knew. It was the beginning of... What? What was this entity's purpose? What did it want with Earth? The air in the old growth forest where locals refused to go was thick, clinging to my lungs like damp wool. The low thrum, the one that had snagged my attention in the observatory, was a constant, visceral tremor now. It vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my legs, settling in my teeth like an incessant ache. My hands, even through the thick leather of my gloves, felt numb, not from the temperature, but from a deeper, more fundamental disconnection. The forest floor, usually a riot of decaying leaves and damp earth, was different. The familiar textures were muted, as if viewed through a thick pane of frosted glass. The scent of pine and loam was there, a ghost of what it should be, overlaid with something else. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood or ozone after a storm. The trees themselves seemed to lean in, their branches skeletal fingers against a bruised, perpetually twilight sky. I could no longer discern the true color of the foliage or even the bark. Everything bled into a uniform, oppressive gray. My breath plumed, not in white clouds, but in a strange, iridescent mist that dissipated unnaturally fast. The thrumming intensified, a low growl that seemed to emanate from every direction at once. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt in my bones, a resonance that threatened to shake me apart. My vision flickered at the edges, as if the world was struggling to maintain its form. Patches of the forest would momentarily sharpen, revealing an impassable, alien geometry in the bark of a tree, or a sudden, jarring clarity in the pattern of moss, before blurring again. I stumbled forward, driven by an instinct I no longer recognized. The path I'd followed, or thought I had followed, was gone. Or perhaps it had never been there. The trees were too close, their trunks impassably thick, their roots snaking across the ground like petrified veins. I stopped, my heart racing a rhythm that felt alien to my own body. The thrumming was a roar now, a tidal wave of vibration that threatened to drown out all other sensation. I raised a trembling hand, looking at my fingers. They seemed elongated, thinner than they should be. The skin, usually pale and marked with the faint lines of age, appeared to be a different texture, smoother, almost translucent. I flexed them, and the movement felt sluggish, disconnected, as if I were operating them through a thick layer of jelly. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, acrid, burning the back of my throat. I coughed, and the sound was distorted, echoing unnaturally, as if it were being played back to me from a great distance. I looked around, desperate for something familiar, something that anchored me to the reality I knew. But there was nothing. The forest was a tapestry of impassable angles and muted colors, a place where the rules of physics seemed to have been rewritten by a careless, indifferent hand. The trees were no longer trees, but colossal, silent sentinels, their forms shifting subtly at the periphery of my vision. The ground beneath me felt less like soil and more like a yielding, porous membrane. A sound, distinct from the pervasive thrumming, cut through the air. It seemed to emanate from the depths of the woods, from a place I couldn't see, but could feel drawing closer. My body reacted before my mind could process. A primal urge to flee, to hide, seized me, but where? Every direction offered the same alien landscape, the same suffocating atmosphere. The whine grew louder, closer. It was accompanied now by a faint, rhythmic clicking, like immense, chitinous joints moving in unison. My gaze fell upon a patch of ground where the gray seemed to deepen, to coalesce. It was shifting, rippling, as if something were trying to push its way through the very fabric of existence. A slick obsidian sheen began to spread, not reflecting the diffused light, but absorbing it. The metallic tang intensified, sharp and sickening. I stumbled backward again, my boot catching on something unseen. I fell, the impact jarring me, but the ground felt strangely soft, yielding. I scrambled to my feet, my hands sinking slightly into the yielding surface. The thrumming, the whine, the clicking, they were all around me now, pressing in, overwhelming my senses. My own form felt wrong. My limbs were heavy, sluggish. The air tasted like static electricity and decay. I looked down at my hands again. They were undeniably different. The skin was stretched taut over bone, the fingers unnaturally long and slender. A faint, pulsing luminescence seemed to emanate from beneath the surface, a sickly green light that flickered with each beat of the thrum. It pulsed with the same sickly green light. The high-pitched whine was now a piercing shriek that vibrated through my skull, and the clicking was a deafening cacophony, 1,000 insectile legs scrabbling against unseen surfaces. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. The forest seemed to close in, the trees contorting into grotesque shapes. The ground beneath me buckled and warped. What was this place? And what had I become? The low thrum, the one that had snagged my attention in the sterile silence of the observatory, now vibrated through my soles, a discordant pulse against the stillness. Each step I took on the moss-slicked ground was a deliberate act, a defiance against the pervasive quiet. I'd followed the signal here, a phantom whisper in the cosmic static, amplified by the peculiar geology of this forgotten place. The trees loomed, ancient and gnarled, their branches skeletal fingers against the bruised twilight sky. The scent of decay was potent wet earth, rotting leaves, and something else, something metallic and acrid that pricked at my nostrils. It was the smell of things that had died and refused to become dust. My handheld sensor, a device I'd repurposed from its original astronomical duties, whined softly. Its needle quivered, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, as I moved deeper into the arboreal gloom. The thrumming intensified, resonating not just in my bones but in my teeth, a subtle ache that promised something far worse. This wasn't just a geological anomaly, it was a focal point, a nexus. I remembered Alina's hand in mine, her laughter like wind chimes in the summer breeze. That memory was a fragile thing now, a shard of glass I held too tightly, always in danger of shattering. He would have understood this need to confront the unknown, this desperate urge to find meaning in the vast, indifferent expanse. The trees thinned, revealing a clearing. It was not natural. The earth here was churned, disturbed, as if something immense had pushed its way through the soil. In the center, a structure rose, or rather, it was the earth, warped and twisted into impassable geometries. It was a hill, but it pulsed with a sickly, internal light, like a bruised organ beneath taut skin. The thrumming was deafening here, a physical pressure against my eardrums. The data I'd collected, the anomalies that had driven me from my comfortable existence, coalesced in my mind. This wasn't just an intelligence, it was a force, a weaver of realities, a sculptor of cosmic laws, and it had noticed us. It had noticed me. I approached the pulsating mound, my breath catching in my throat. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The metallic tang intensified, sharp and coppery. I could feel it now, a subtle pressure on my skin, like 1,000 tiny hands not quite touching. It was the feeling of being observed, not by eyes, but by something far more pervasive. It hummed with the same resonant frequency as the ground, a miniature echo of the cosmic symphony I had inadvertently tuned into. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and traced its sharp edge. As my hand touched the shard, the thrumming peaked. The ground beneath me vibrated violently, not with seismic tremors, but with an internal resonance. The trees around the clearing swayed as if caught in a gale, though no wind stirred. And then the sky. The sky began to change. It wasn't the familiar canvas of stars and nebulae. It was a tapestry of swirling, impassable colors. Hues I had no names for, shifting and coalescing into patterns that defied geometry. They were patterns that spoke of vast, unknowable processes, of cosmic entities moving through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. And within these shifting colors, I saw faces. They were the architects of this cosmic order, and they were looking. They were looking at me. A voice, not of sound but of pure comprehension, echoed within my mind. It was not a language, but a direct transmission of thought. a transfer of understanding so profound it threatened to shatter my very being. We were potential, a canvas waiting to be painted, a melody waiting to be composed. And the entity I had sought, the intelligence beyond human grasp, was not a benevolent observer. It was the artist. It showed me the universe as it truly was, a vast, intricate mechanism of exquisite, terrible beauty, governed by laws that dwarfed our own understanding. And Earth, my precious, flawed home, was merely a single, nascent note in a symphony that had been playing for incomprehensible ages. We were children playing with fire, unaware of the inferno we could unleash. The pressure in my head intensified. It was not pain, but an overwhelming influx of information, a deluge of cosmic perspective that threatened to drown my individual consciousness. I saw the threads connecting all things, the intricate web of causality stretching across space-time. And I saw where I fit, not as a discoverer, not as an interpreter, but as a single resonant frequency within the grand, unfolding design. My own thoughts began to fray, to dissolve into the larger current. The memory of Alina, once a sharp anchor, blurred at the edges, becoming just another facet of the cosmic tapestry. My grief, my love, my fear, all were being recontextualized, rendered into a form I could barely recognize. I was being absorbed, not into oblivion, but into something far more terrifying, comprehension. The faces in the sky turned their collective, amorphous gaze towards the shard I still held, a silent acknowledgement, a recognition. I was no longer Thomas, the astrophysicist haunted by loss. I was a conduit, a tuning fork. I felt my sense of self begin to loosen, like sand sifting through fingers. The thrumming of the earth became the beating of my own heart, and my heart became the pulse of the cosmos. There was this resolution. Or was it simply the beginning of a new, unimaginable form of existence, one I had not sought and could not escape? The sky swirled, the impossible colors deepening, and I felt myself becoming part of the pattern, a single, resonant tone in the symphony of the infinite.